In the courtroom, everyone froze when the twins uttered four words that shocked everyone. The judge was speechless, not knowing how to react. These girls shattered everything that had been built for months. What did they say? You won't believe it. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. The courtroom was suffocatingly quiet. It wasn't just the lack of noise, but the weight of the moment that hung in the air, pressing down on every person present. The walls seemed to absorb the tension, the low hum of murmurs now replaced by a stillness so profound that even the smallest sound seemed amplified. The prosecution sat to one side, their faces stern, eyes focused on the two young girls sitting at the witness stand. On the other side, the defense appeared equally composed, but their eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The judge, a middle-aged man with a severe expression, watched the girls intently, his fingers lightly tapping on the surface of his desk. He had heard countless cases, seen countless witnesses, but this one was different. These two little girls were the center of a storm they barely understood, caught in the middle of a battle that had been raging for months. The mother, who had once seemed so poised, had made accusations that had torn their family apart. Now, her own daughters were about to reveal something that could unravel everything, the very fabric of the case the court had been building. The room held its breath. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall seemed louder than usual, marking the minutes that seemed to stretch into eternity. The girls sat side by side, their hands clasped tightly together, their small frames shaking ever so slightly. It wasn't fear that kept them still, but a quiet determination. They were going to speak the truth. The judge cleared his throat, his eyes scanning the room, then finally locking with the girls. They both looked up at him, their faces pale but resolute. He could feel the weight of their silence, the anticipation mounting. "You may speak," he said softly, his voice echoing in the otherwise silent room. And then, with a deep breath, one of the girls finally opened her mouth, her voice steady but piercing in the stillness. "Our mother lied to you." The moment the words left the girl's lips, it was as if time itself had frozen. The courtroom, once humming with tension, seemed to stop altogether. For a brief second, no one knew how to react. It was as though the air had thickened, stifling every breath, every thought. The girls stood there, their small forms barely visible above the witness stand, their faces a mixture of calm and determination. Their eyes, however, held an undeniable fire, a glimmer of something that had been buried for too long. The words echoed in the space, lingering far beyond their simple, unadorned meaning. "Our mother lied to you." They had no elaboration, no apology for the weight they carried. It was a statement of raw truth that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. The judge's face went pale, his previously stern demeanor now clouded with confusion and disbelief. He blinked several times, as though trying to process what he had just heard, but the silence around him seemed to amplify the enormity of their statement. Lawyers on both sides looked at each other in disbelief, their mouths open, unsure of what to do next. The prosecution, who had been building their case around the mother's testimony, now found themselves at a loss. The defense team, equally stunned, exchanged hurried glances, trying to grasp the implications of the sudden turn of events. Even the spectators in the gallery leaned forward, sensing the shift in the narrative, a shift they could not have anticipated. The girls stood still, their hands gripping the edges of the stand, their small bodies trembling with an energy that had nothing to do with fear. They weren't afraid. They were finally speaking the truth that had been locked away inside them for far too long. And that truth had just shattered the very foundation of the case against their father. The room was silent, but the tension, once thick, now felt like a pressure about to burst. Everyone waited for someone to speak, to break the silence, but no one dared. The truth was out in the open, and it had left everyone reeling. The judge, a middle-aged man with sharp features and an air of authority, sat frozen in his chair. His light skin, usually flushed with a sense of composure, had turned pale, as if the weight of the girl's words had physically drained him. His eyes darted back and forth between the two girls standing in front of him, their innocent faces betraying the gravity of what they had just revealed. His lips moved slightly, as though he was trying to formulate a response, but no sound came out. It was as if the words had paralyzed him. For a long moment, he simply stared at them, his brow furrowing in disbelief. The courtroom, which had been suffused with an air of anticipation moments before, now hummed with an uncomfortable silence. The judge, who had been in charge of this case for months, who had listened to countless testimonies, was now caught in an impossible situation. How could he possibly reconcile the testimony of these young girls with everything he had heard until now? His mind raced, struggling to process the reality that had just unfolded in front of him. The prosecution, who had built their case meticulously around the mother's statements, had no counter to what had been said. The foundation of their argument, which they had carefully constructed, had just been obliterated in a single moment. The mother, once their star witness, was now cast in a completely different light. Could she have really lied? Had everything she said been false? The judge shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his hands gripping the arms of his chair. He had seen many cases in his career, some with shocking turns, but nothing quite like this. His role as the impartial adjudicator seemed almost irrelevant now. How could he possibly proceed with the trial when everything he thought he knew had just been torn apart? The silence in the room grew heavier, almost suffocating. Everyone, from the defense attorneys to the onlookers, waited for the judge to speak, to break the tension that hung in the air. But he remained still, unable to find the words. His mind struggled to catch up with the storm that had just been unleashed in his courtroom. In that moment, the judge, so accustomed to maintaining control, was no longer in charge. The truth, simple and shocking, had overtaken him. As the courtroom remained eerily silent, the truth behind the girl's words began to surface, unraveling a story that no one had expected. The defense attorney, sensing an opportunity, quickly asked the girls to explain further. They hesitated for a moment, exchanging a brief glance, as if bracing themselves for the weight of the truth they were about to expose. Then, in unison, they began to tell their story. Their father, they explained, was a kind and loving man who had always cared for them. He had worked tirelessly to provide for their family, always putting their needs above his own. The girls described their childhood with him as warm and full of love, a stark contrast to the cold and controlling nature of their mother. For years, their father had been the emotional anchor of their lives, a man who had been there for every milestone, every celebration, every hardship. But everything changed when their mother, once a model of virtue in the eyes of everyone around her, began to show a different side. The girls recalled how their mother, who had once been gentle and nurturing, had started to grow distant and cold. There were whispered arguments, late-night phone calls, and mysterious meetings that none of them fully understood. Over time, their mother had begun to treat their father with disdain, accusing him of things he never did, belittling him in front of the children, and eventually leaving him. The girls were heartbroken when their mother filed for divorce, but it wasn't just the end of their parents' marriage that troubled them, it was what came after. Their mother, determined to take everything from their father, made false accusations that painted him as an unfit parent. She claimed he had been abusive, neglectful, and irresponsible, despite the fact that all of their memories with him were filled with love and care. The lies she told were enough to persuade the court that he was no longer fit to have custody of them. The girls, however, knew the truth. They knew that their father was no monster. He was a victim of a woman who had been blinded by greed and resentment. When they realized what their mother was doing, they tried to speak out, but their voices were ignored, until now. Their decision to speak up in court was not just a desperate attempt to clear their father's name, but a plea for justice. They knew that their words could change everything, but they also understood the consequences. They were brave enough to expose the woman who had manipulated the system to get what she wanted, and they did it for the one person who had always been there for them, their father. As they spoke, their voices grew stronger, more resolute. The weight of their emotions was evident, but so was their determination. They weren't just little girls anymore, they were the guardians of their father's truth. Their words rang out with the force of everything they had witnessed, everything they had endured in silence. The courtroom, once filled with skepticism, now listened intently, captivated by the sincerity and courage of these two young girls. The mother's lies, carefully crafted over time, were beginning to unravel before everyone's eyes. The girls' testimony was powerful, not just because of the content of their words, but because of the love and loyalty they had for their father. In that moment, they were no longer just children caught in a family dispute, they were fierce defenders of the truth, unwilling to let their father's life be torn apart by lies. Life with their mother was far from the ideal that anyone could imagine. Despite the outward appearance of a perfect family, social media photos of smiles and happy moments, the reality behind the closed doors of their home was suffocating. The girls had always been taught to show respect, to maintain appearances, and to never question their mother, who had always prided herself on her perfection. But as time wore on, the walls of their home became a cage, and the love they once had for their mother began to fade, replaced by confusion and fear. Their mother was distant, emotionally cold, and often absent even when she was physically present. She would spend long hours in her study, talking on the phone or working on her computer, her stern face barely lifting when the girls entered the room. When she did interact with them, it was rarely with affection. She was quick to reprimand them for the smallest mistake, but never offered praise when they succeeded. The warmth of a mother's embrace was something they had only dreamed of, and even that seemed like a far-off memory. The girls would often stay in their room, reading, drawing, or doing anything to avoid the tension that hung thick in the air. Even simple acts, like preparing dinner, were done with mechanical precision, with no shared laughter or conversation to lighten the atmosphere. At the dinner table, their mother would sit in silence, her eyes fixed on her plate, her thoughts a mystery to the girls. On the rare occasion when she did speak, her words were sharp and laced with criticism. Every small failure was met with condescension, and every success was ignored. Their mother never showed any interest in the things they loved. Their school performances, their artwork, their achievements, they were all met with indifference. But the most damaging of all was her attitude towards their emotions. Whenever the girls showed signs of vulnerability or sadness, she would brush them off, calling them weak and too emotional. "Get over it," she would snap. "Life isn't about feelings, it's about strength." As the girls grew older, the emotional abuse became harder to bear. They began to internalize the cruelty, questioning their worth and their place in the world. Were they simply failures in their mother's eyes, destined to be ignored or punished for their imperfections? The love they had once felt for their mother, the woman who had once been a figure of safety and protection, had turned to fear and resentment. They couldn't escape the feeling of walking on eggshells in their own home, where every word and every action seemed to carry the weight of their mother's unspoken expectations. The isolation was stifling. There were no family vacations, no movie nights, no simple moments of joy. The girls had stopped trying to reach out to their mother long ago, knowing that any attempt would be met with rejection. In her eyes, they were burdens, interruptions to the life she had carefully crafted for herself. The warmth that they craved was replaced by a chilling sense of loneliness, a sense that no matter what they did, it would never be enough. But beneath the surface of their mother's cold exterior was something far more dangerous. Her cruelty was not just emotional, it was psychological. The girls were constantly made to feel inferior, not just as children, but as individuals. Their self-worth was continually diminished in subtle ways, until they began to doubt everything about themselves. It wasn't just their actions that were criticized, it was their very essence. Every word they spoke, every decision they made, was scrutinized and belittled. And yet, despite all the pain and suffering, the girls held on to something, an ember of hope that somehow, somewhere, there was love waiting for them. They knew their father loved them, even if he was no longer in their lives. They carried that love with them, even in the darkest moments. It was the only thing that kept them going, the only thing that gave them the strength to endure the suffocating environment their mother had created. In the quiet of their rooms, away from their mother's cold gaze, the girls would confide in each other. They would whisper about the things they wished for, simple things, like a warm hug or a kind word. They dreamed of a life where love wasn't something to be earned, but something freely given. But as much as they longed for these simple comforts, they knew deep down that the mother they had once admired would never give them the love they needed. And that was the most heartbreaking truth of all. For as long as they could remember, their father had been the one steady source of warmth in their lives, the only person who truly seemed to care for them. He wasn't perfect, but to the girls, he was everything. His love was unconditional, and his actions spoke louder than any words ever could. He wasn't just a father by title, he was their protector, their confidant, the one who showed them what it meant to be truly cared for. Their father had always been present in their lives, even though he wasn't living with them full time. When they were young, weekends with him were like a breath of fresh air, a stark contrast to the coldness and isolation they experienced with their mother. He took them to the park, listened to their endless chatter, and made them feel like they mattered. He taught them how to ride bikes, how to read, how to face the world with courage. He made them feel like they were the most important people in the world. Even when their mother had her ways of cutting him out of their lives, their father never gave up. He still called to check on them, made sure they were okay, and never once made them feel abandoned. There was a constant, unwavering presence in their lives that gave them the strength to endure the cruelty they faced at home. They knew that, no matter what happened, their father would never stop loving them. As they grew older, the girls began to see the stark contrast between the two parental figures. Their mother, who was cold and manipulative, always made them feel small, as though their needs and emotions were nothing more than an inconvenience to her. But their father, despite the challenges life threw at him, was different. He never raised his voice, never belittled them, never made them feel unworthy. With him, they were always enough. It wasn't just the love he gave them, it was the way he made them feel seen, valued, and important. But things started to change when their mother decided to fight for custody of them. She made accusations about their father, painting him as an unfit parent, someone who didn't deserve to have them in his life. The girls were horrified. They knew their mother had always resented their father, but to see her take this drastic step, this attempt to tear them away from the one person who had always cared for them, was too much to bear. The girls had never seen their father so vulnerable. He tried to reason with their mother, tried to keep the peace for their sake, but the reality of the situation was clear. Their mother wasn't interested in fairness or love, she wanted control. She wanted to erase their father from their lives and take everything from him. Her words were sharp, cutting through the girls' hearts as she twisted the truth, painting their father as something he was not. The girls, who had once felt helpless in the face of their mother's cruelty, realized they could no longer stay silent. They couldn't let their mother take their father away from them. He was the one constant in their lives, the one person who had never abandoned them. Without him, they would be lost. That's when they made the decision to fight, not just for their father, but for their own sense of self-worth. They knew they couldn't allow their mother's lies to take away the one person who had shown them what true love was. It wasn't just about keeping their family together, it was about standing up for what was right. The girls knew the road ahead would be difficult. They were young, and the court system wasn't always kind to children caught in the middle of a bitter custody battle. But they couldn't let fear stop them. They had seen enough of their mother's cruelty to know that if they didn't speak up now, they would lose their father forever. And that thought was unbearable. With their father's love as their guiding force, the girls knew they could take on the world. They were determined to protect him, to ensure that the lies their mother spread would not break the bond they shared. Their love for their father became the anchor they clung to, the one thing they would fight for no matter the cost. As the court battle progressed, the girls found their voices. They began to speak out, not only against their mother's lies but against the system that allowed her to manipulate the truth. They knew they weren't just fighting for their father's custody, they were fighting for their right to live in a home filled with love, not fear. They were fighting for the man who had always made them feel like they mattered. With each passing day, their resolve grew stronger. They were no longer the frightened, neglected children they had once been. They had become warriors, defenders of their father's love, protectors of the bond they shared with him. And as the court date neared, they knew one thing for certain: they would never let anyone tear their family apart. Not their mother. Not anyone. Their father had given them everything they needed to face this battle, and they would fight with everything they had to keep him in their lives. The betrayal by their mother cut deeper than anything the girls had ever experienced. For years, they had trusted her, believed in her, and clung to the idea that she was the one who would always protect them. But now, their mother had turned against them, using her influence and authority to paint their father as someone he was not. It was a betrayal so deep that it shook the very foundation of their lives. At first, the girls couldn't understand what was happening. Their mother, who had always been the one to scold them for being too loud, too messy, or too opinionated, had suddenly become the architect of a scheme that sought to destroy their family. She accused their father of being abusive, of neglecting them, of being unfit to raise them. These were the very things she had often criticized their father for, but now, she was using them against him in the most twisted of ways. Their mother's lies were not just a betrayal of their father, they were a betrayal of the love and trust the girls had placed in her. As the accusations against their father mounted, the girls started to question everything they had been told. Their mother, who had once been the center of their world, had suddenly become the villain in their story. The love she had once shown them was now overshadowed by her manipulation, her cruelty, and her desire for control. What hurt the most was how their mother tried to turn them against their father. She painted a picture of a man they had never known, a man who was cruel, who didn't care about them, who would abandon them for his own gain. She tried to manipulate their memories, twisting past events to fit her narrative. The girls were caught in the middle, torn between the mother they had once trusted and the father who had always been there for them. At first, they wanted to believe her. After all, she was their mother. She was supposed to be the one person they could always count on. But as the lies piled up, the girls began to see the cracks in her story. They started to remember the moments that didn't fit with the picture their mother was painting. They remembered the love their father had shown them, the way he had always put them first, the way he had made them feel safe even when the world around them felt uncertain. It wasn't easy to confront their mother. She had always been the authority figure in their lives, and to go against her was a terrifying thought. But as the girls began to realize the depths of her deception, they couldn't stay silent any longer. They couldn't allow their mother's lies to destroy the one person who had truly cared for them. The truth, no matter how painful, was the only thing they could rely on. Their mother's cruelty became even more apparent as she tried to manipulate them into choosing sides. She would tell them that their father didn't love them, that he didn't want them. She would tell them that their father was the reason for all the pain in their lives. She tried to break their spirits, to make them believe that they didn't deserve the love and care their father had always given them. But the girls weren't as easily swayed. They had witnessed their father's love firsthand. They had seen him sacrifice for them, work tirelessly to give them a life filled with love and security. They knew the truth of his heart, and no amount of manipulation could change that. They had been raised to believe in fairness, in truth, and in the power of love. And they knew that no matter how much their mother tried to twist the facts, they could never deny the bond they shared with their father. The girls' courage grew as the court case progressed. They knew that the truth was on their side, and they were willing to risk everything to protect their father. They knew that if they didn't speak up, their mother's lies would destroy their family. And that was something they could not let happen. Their mother's betrayal didn't just affect their father, it shattered their sense of security, their belief in the world they had known. The girls were forced to grow up faster than they should have, forced to become advocates for their own lives and the lives of the people they loved. The weight of the situation was heavy, but they knew that they couldn't back down. They had to fight for their family, for the truth, and for the love that had always been there, even when their mother tried to erase it. As the case continued, the girls' resolve only strengthened. They became more determined to expose their mother's lies, to show the world that their father was the man they had always known him to be. They weren't just fighting for custody, they were fighting for their right to be loved, to be believed, and to have a future free from the cruelty their mother had tried to impose on them. The courtroom was heavy with tension as the final moments of the trial approached. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation, and the air seemed to buzz with the weight of years of struggle. At the heart of it all were the two girls, brave, determined, and resolute in their quest for truth. Their voices, once silenced by fear and manipulation, were now the beacon of justice that would illuminate the dark corners of their family's ordeal. As they took the stand, their testimonies rang out like a powerful call for truth, each word a nail driven into the coffin of the lies that had shackled them for so long. The courtroom was a battleground, but it was one that was finally revealing the ugly truth. The girls recounted their experiences, how their lives had been twisted by deceit, how they had been used as pawns in a game of control and manipulation. Their words were raw, yet unwavering, each sentence an unyielding declaration that justice was not just a concept, it was a necessity, a right that had been long denied. The defense team, once confident in their falsehoods, now found themselves on the back foot. Their attempts to discredit the girls fell flat, their arguments faltering under the weight of the overwhelming evidence. The truth had an undeniable power, and in the face of it, even the most polished lies could not hold their ground. As the girls continued to speak, the room seemed to shrink, the reality of the situation dawning on every single person present. It was not just the girls' courage that won the day, it was the strength of their bond with their father. The love and devotion they shared was evident in every word, every glance, every tear that fell. Their father, once a broken man, now stood tall with hope in his eyes. The lies that had sought to separate him from his daughters were now unraveling, thread by thread. The courtroom had become the stage for their ultimate reunion, a place where the forces of justice would once again restore what had been wrongfully taken. As the judge listened, the weight of the testimony became undeniable. The legal battle that had stretched on for years was drawing to a close, and the scales of justice were finally tipping in their favor. The courtroom, once a place of uncertainty and fear, now felt like a sanctuary, a place where the truth had triumphed, where justice would reign supreme. The verdict came like a breath of fresh air, swift, definitive, and absolute. The girls and their father were freed from the grip of lies, their family whole once more. The lies that had been used to manipulate and divide them were exposed for what they truly were, empty and hollow. The victory was not just legal, it was emotional, a triumph of the human spirit over the forces that had sought to tear them apart. In the end, the victory in the courtroom was not just a victory of law, but of love. It was the reclamation of truth, of integrity, and of the deep, unbreakable bond between a father and his daughters. With the battle finally over, they stood together, stronger than ever, free to begin their new life, one where lies and manipulation had no place, and where justice. The dust had settled, and the echoes of the courtroom's drama slowly faded into the past. But the journey for the girls and their father was far from over. The legal battle had been won, but the true work of healing, rebuilding, and rediscovering who they were as a family was only just beginning. In the weeks that followed, their lives were no longer dictated by the fear and deception that had once plagued them. They were free to reclaim the pieces of themselves that had been lost in the shadow of manipulation. The father, who had once felt powerless and isolated, now found a renewed sense of purpose. No longer was he a figure caught in a struggle to hold on to his rights, instead, he became a symbol of resilience. His daughters, who had seen him break down under the weight of false accusations, now saw him rise with a strength they had always believed in, even when it had seemed out of reach. The girls, too, emerged from the darkness stronger, more determined, and more connected to their father than ever before. In their hearts, they carried the scars of what had been, but they also held the powerful truth of what they had overcome together. The once frail bond that had been tested by the storm of lies and manipulation now pulsed with a new energy, one grounded in mutual respect, love, and a shared sense of justice. Each girl had found her voice, her strength, and the unshakable belief that together, they could face anything. For the first time in years, they allowed themselves to dream again. The possibilities that had seemed unreachable in the depths of their struggles now felt tangible. The girls enrolled in school, not as victims of their past, but as confident young women ready to take on the future. Their father, who had always put them first, supported them in every step of their new journey, offering encouragement, wisdom, and a sense of security that had once been lost. They spent weekends together, simple, joyful moments of laughter and connection. The once empty house was now filled with the warmth of shared memories and new traditions. Their new beginning was not defined by the struggles they had endured, but by the love and trust they had rebuilt, piece by piece. They learned to embrace the present, no longer looking over their shoulders at the past that had tried to break them. With every passing day, they grew stronger, more united, and more aware of the preciousness of the family they had fought so hard to keep together. Their home, once a place of tension and fear, had transformed into a sanctuary of peace, where fear no longer had a place. The father and his daughters looked ahead with hope, knowing that their journey together was far from over, but confident that no matter what the future held, they would face it together. Their new chapter had begun, and this time, there would be no more room for lies, fear, or manipulation. What lay ahead was a future shaped by truth, love, and the unbreakable bond of family. If you've enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more heartfelt and inspiring tales. Stay tuned for our next chapter of resilience, hope, and new beginnings.